As I stood there, the weight of betrayal crashing down on me like a tidal wave, I could hardly breathe. The words echoed in my mind, "I'm in love with him." My wife, the woman I had shared my life with, had chosen a famous author over me. The very thought twisted my insides, igniting a fire of rage and despair. I felt like a fool, a mere pawn in a game I never wanted to play. How could she do this to us, to me? It happened on a Wednesday evening, a night that had started so innocently. I had been looking forward to a quiet dinner with Claire, my wife. We had a routine. She would come home from work, and we would share a meal, talk about our days, and unwind together. But that evening something felt off. She arrived late, her eyes darting away from mine, and her phone buzzed incessantly on the table between us. I could sense the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "Everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, just busy at work," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But I knew her too well. There was a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, that I couldn't ignore. When she excused herself to take a call, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I tried to focus on the food, but it was tasteless, bland. My mind raced with possibilities, each more sinister than the last. Then it happened. I overheard her voice hushed but unmistakably fervent. "I can't wait to see you again, Mark. You make me feel alive." My heart plummeted. Mark. The name hung in the air like a noose, tightening around my throat. I didn't need to hear more. I knew exactly who Mark was, a celebrated author, the kind of man who graced magazine covers and captivated audiences with his words. I felt my world tilt, the ground beneath me shaking. How could she? Images of our life together flashed through my mind. Our wedding day, the promises we made, the love we built. And now it felt like a house of cards collapsing with a single gust of wind. I was drowning in betrayal, the anguish clawing at my chest. When she returned, I confronted her, needing answers, needing to understand the betrayal that cut so deep. "Is it true? Are you seeing Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. Claire's expression faltered, her eyes widening in shock. "I can explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "How you fell in love with a man who writes stories while I'm at home waiting for you. How could you do this to us?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wanted to see her pain, to feel the weight of her choices. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you, but he understands me in a way you don't." Those words struck me like a physical blow. "Understand you? You think he understands you? He's just using you, Claire. You're a pawn in his game and you don't even see it." I stormed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest, rage swirling within me. How could she choose him over me? The thought made my blood boil. I felt like a fool, a mere shadow of the man I once was. I had given her everything, and in return she had taken my love and thrown it away as if it meant nothing. But I wouldn't let this stand. I would make him pay for what he had taken from me. I would ensure that his next book, a book that would undoubtedly be a bestseller, would flop. I would become the architect of his downfall, and in doing so, perhaps reclaim a piece of my shattered pride. As I paced the floor of our living room that night, my mind raced with dark thoughts. Revenge was a bitter pill, but it was the only thing that could ease the pain. I would show them both that I wasn't a man to be trifled with. I would take back my power, and the first step would be to dismantle everything he had built. I could feel the anger coursing through my veins, a fire ignited by betrayal. This was not just about Claire anymore. It was about my dignity, my worth. I was done being the victim. Before the affair, Claire and I had what I thought was a solid marriage, a love built on years of shared experiences and mutual respect. I remember the day we met, a chance encounter at a coffee shop where I was scribbling notes for a novel that had long since been abandoned. Claire was sitting across from me, engrossed in a book by one of her favorite authors. The way her brow furrowed in concentration and the light that danced in her eyes when she turned the pages drew me in. I was captivated, and before I knew it, I was striking up a conversation. Our relationship blossomed quickly. We shared a love for literature, art, and long walks under the stars. We spent countless evenings discussing books, exchanging our thoughts on characters and plots, and dreaming about the future. I adored her passion for life and her ability to see beauty in the mundane. We married 2 years later, and I believed we were partners in every sense of the word. But as the years passed, I began to notice subtle changes in Claire. The late nights at work became more frequent, and her phone seemed to be a constant companion, buzzing with messages that she would quickly dismiss. I brushed it off, convincing myself that it was just the stress of her job as a marketing executive. She was ambitious, and I admired that about her. I wanted her to succeed, and I thought that meant being supportive, even if it meant sacrificing some of our time together. Yet, there were signs I now recognize as red flags. The way she laughed a little too hard at certain jokes, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the latest book she was working on with her team. Each little moment I dismissed as harmless. I convinced myself that her excitement was just a part of her personality, a quirk that made her who she was. I never imagined it could be a sign of something more sinister. As her job grew more demanding, our evenings together dwindled. I remember the last time we had a real conversation that felt intimate. We were sprawled on the couch, a bottle of wine between us, and I asked her about her dreams. "I want to write a book one day," she said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Something that speaks to people, something that makes them feel." I smiled, encouraged her, and told her I believed in her talent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that our connection was fraying at the edges. I had invested so much into our marriage, so much of myself, that the thought of losing her felt unbearable. I tried to rekindle our romance, planning weekend getaways, surprising her with flowers and cooking her favorite meals, but nothing seemed to reach her. It was as if a wall had been built between us, and I was left on the outside, peering in. The realization that Claire had found solace in someone else was a gut punch, a betrayal that tore through the fabric of our lives. I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand to know why she hadn't come to me when she felt lost. Instead, I had learned of her infidelity through whispers and half-truths. That was the worst part, the sudden awareness that I had been blind to the cracks forming in our relationship. I thought about the nights I had spent alone, waiting for her to come home, the silence of our empty house echoing around me like a haunting melody. I had filled those voids with work, with writing, pouring my heart into stories that never saw the light of day. But now, those stories felt insignificant compared to the reality of my life. I had poured everything into my marriage only to find it crumbling before my eyes. With each passing day, I felt more like a bystander in my own life. I wanted to be the husband who stood by his wife, who supported her dreams. But now I felt betrayed, foolish for believing that love could withstand the test of time and temptation. The memories of our laughter, our shared dreams, now felt tainted, overshadowed by the image of her with him. Mark, the man who had stolen my wife's heart. As I reflected on our life together, I realized that my love for Claire had been steadfast, while hers had been fragile, easily swayed by the allure of a man who wrote stories that captivated the masses. I had been the steady rock, and she had chosen the fleeting thrill of a writer's charm. It was a bitter pill to swallow, one that left a sour taste in my mouth. But I was done being the victim. I would not allow my pain to fester in silence. Instead, I would transform it into something powerful, a force that would drive me to reclaim my dignity and, in the process, dismantle the author's success. I would make sure that Mark's next book was a failure, and in doing so, perhaps I could find a way to heal the wounds he had inflicted on my life. Mark Ellis was a name that reverberated through the literary world like a thunderclap. He was the kind of author whose books flew off the shelves, whose signings drew crowds of adoring fans, their eyes sparkling with admiration as they clutched their copies, eager for a glimpse of the man who had spun tales that resonated with their very souls. He was everything I was not, charismatic, handsome, and effortlessly charming. It felt like a cruel joke that the man who had captured my wife's heart was also the embodiment of everything I felt I lacked. When I first heard Claire mention him, I had dismissed it as a passing interest. She talked about his latest novel, a sweeping romance that had become a bestseller, and I had nodded along, feigning enthusiasm. But as her admiration for him grew, so did my unease. She had taken to quoting his lines, her voice laced with a kind of reverence that made my stomach churn. I tried to shake off my jealousy, telling myself that it was just a phase, a fleeting infatuation with a talented author. After all, I had my own writing aspirations, even if they had taken a backseat to our life together. But the more I learned about Mark, the more I felt like a shadow in my own life. I had seen his photo online: dark hair, piercing blue eyes, a smile that could charm the sun. He had a way of presenting himself that made it seem like he was always the center of attention, a magnetic force that drew people in. I couldn't help but feel inadequate in comparison. I was just an aspiring novelist, a man who had yet to publish a single word that anyone outside my close circle had ever read. As Claire's affair unfolded, Mark transformed from a mere name into a symbol of my inadequacies. I could picture them together, laughing over coffee, sharing secrets, and exploring the world through the lens of his literary genius. The thought made my blood boil. How could she choose him over me? What did he have that I did? It gnawed at me like an insatiable beast, a constant reminder of my failures as a husband and a man. I found myself stalking his social media profiles, scrolling through photos of him at book launches, surrounded by fans, his effortless charm on full display. I seethed as I read the glowing reviews of his work, each one a dagger to my heart. Brilliant, they called him, a master of emotion. I wanted to scream. How could they not see the truth? He was stealing my wife's affection, and I was powerless to stop it. As I delved deeper into Mark's life, I discovered more than just his literary success. I learned about his penchant for the dramatic, his flair for the grandiose. He loved to host exclusive events for his fans, often featuring elaborate themes that transformed ordinary venues into fantastical worlds. I could see why Claire was drawn to him. He was the kind of man who could sweep a woman off her feet with a mere smile. I, on the other hand, was the steady, reliable partner who had become predictable in her eyes. The jealousy that simmered within me morphed into something darker, more insidious. I was no longer just a man betrayed. I was a man fueled by rage and a burning desire for revenge. I couldn't let him get away with this. I had to make him pay for what he had taken from me. I envisioned sabotaging his next book, ensuring that it would flop, that the world would see him for the fraud I believed him to be. I began to plot my revenge, my mind racing with ideas on how to bring him down. I had no experience in the world of publishing beyond my own failed attempts, but I was determined to learn. I knew that if I wanted to succeed, I needed to understand the industry, to figure out how to manipulate it to my advantage. I started researching the publishing process, the marketing strategies that propelled authors to success, and the pitfalls that could lead to failure. I thought about how Mark's last book had soared to the top of the charts, propelled by a viral marketing campaign and the allure of his image. But what if I could exploit that? What if I could create a narrative that painted him in a negative light, that turned public opinion against him? The idea filled me with a sense of purpose, a clarity I hadn't felt since the discovery of Claire's betrayal. I also began to think about Claire. I was torn between wanting to confront her about her feelings and using her as a pawn in my scheme. I knew she still cared for me, but her infatuation with Mark clouded her judgment. I could see it in her eyes when she spoke about him, the way her voice softened at the mention of his name. It was infuriating, yet it also sparked a plan in my mind. If I could gather information about Mark's upcoming release, I could manipulate the narrative surrounding it. I needed to find a way to get close to him, to infiltrate his world. Perhaps I could attend one of his book signings or literary events, posing as a fan. I'd glean information, learn about his upcoming projects, and then use that knowledge to orchestrate his downfall. As the pieces began to fall into place, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wouldn't just be about revenge. It would be about reclaiming my identity, my worth. I would show Claire that I was not just a man scorned, but a force to be reckoned with. I would take back the power he had stolen from me, and in the process, perhaps I would find a way to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. It was time to put my plan into action. I would become the architect of Mark Ellis's failure, and with each step I took, I felt a sense of purpose solidifying within me. I would ensure that he paid for the pain he had caused, and in doing so, I would reclaim my place in Claire's heart. With a newfound determination, I set my plan into motion. The first step was to gather information about Mark Ellis's upcoming novel. I needed to know everything: his writing process, the themes he was exploring, and any potential vulnerabilities that I could exploit. I became a detective in my own life, sifting through articles, interviews, and social media posts, piecing together a profile of the man who had stolen my wife's affection. I learned that Mark was set to release his next book in just a few months. It was touted as a return to form, a heartfelt exploration of love and loss that promised to resonate with his audience. I could almost hear the praise echoing in my mind before it even hit the shelves. But I also discovered that he had a series of book signings and readings scheduled, events that drew large crowds and significant media attention. This was my chance to get close to him. I decided to attend one of his book signings under the guise of an enthusiastic fan. I practiced my facade in front of the mirror, rehearsing lines that would allow me to blend in while also subtly probing for information. "I loved your last book, Mark. What inspired you to write this new one?" I would ask, feigning admiration while secretly looking for weaknesses. But attending the event was just the first part of my plan. I needed to create a narrative that would tarnish Mark's reputation in the eyes of the public and the literary community. I knew that the literary world was rife with gossip and intrigue. All it took was a whisper to turn admiration into disdain. I began to think about how I could plant seeds of doubt about his character, his work, and his intentions. As I continued my research, I stumbled upon an article detailing Mark's past, rumors of his tumultuous relationships, whispers of egotism, and the pressure he faced to maintain his literary status. I realized that if I could amplify these stories, I could create a backlash against him. I could paint him as not just a rival but a flawed man, someone unworthy of the pedestal on which he had been placed. I crafted a plan to target the online literary community, forums, social media, and book review sites. I would create anonymous accounts and begin posting reviews that highlighted Mark's alleged shortcomings as a person and a writer. "His writing is formulaic," I would say. "It lacks the depth and authenticity one would expect from someone of his stature." I would sow doubt, challenge his talent, and watch as the community began to turn against him. But I knew that I couldn't do this alone. I needed to enlist the help of others who shared my disdain for Mark, those who felt overlooked by the literary elite. I reached out to a few online groups, posing as a fellow writer who was disillusioned with the industry's favoritism towards certain authors. I shared my frustrations, and before long, I found a small group of like-minded individuals who were eager to join my cause. They were writers who had faced rejection, who felt overshadowed by the likes of Mark Ellis, and they were ready to help me bring him down. As we began to strategize, I felt a thrill of excitement coursing through me. Together, we would create a movement, a collective voice that would challenge the narrative surrounding Mark's work. I envisioned a series of coordinated posts and reviews, each one carefully crafted to build momentum and create a snowball effect. The more attention we garnered, the more likely it was that the media would pick up on the story. But as I plotted my revenge, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Was I really willing to destroy a man's career? I justified my actions by reminding myself of the pain Mark had caused. He had taken my wife's love and shattered my world. But the moral dilemmas lingered in the back of my mind like a persistent itch. I was crossing a line, and I knew it. Yet with every moment I spent planning, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was no longer a passive victim. I was taking control of my narrative, rewriting the story of my life. I would not let Mark Ellis continue to bask in the glow of his undeserved success. I would show him that there were consequences for his actions, that his charm and talent could not shield him from the truth. The day of the book signing approached, and I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I had rehearsed my lines, prepared for every possible interaction, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something dark. I was stepping into a world of deception and manipulation, and once I crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. On the day of the signing, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that struck the right balance between casual and respectful. I arrived early, positioning myself near the front of the line, my heart racing with adrenaline. As I waited, I observed the other fans, their excitement palpable as they chatted about their favorite moments from Mark's previous works. I felt like an imposter among them, but I steeled myself, reminding myself of my purpose. When Mark finally arrived, the crowd erupted in applause, and I felt a knot of anger twist in my stomach. He was everything I despised, confident, charismatic, and utterly unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As he began signing books and engaging with fans, I took a deep breath and prepared to put my plan into action. "Mark," I called out as I reached the front of the line, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my face. "I absolutely loved your last book. What inspired you to write this new one?" The moment he turned to face me, I felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with dread. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the first step in my quest for revenge. I would gather the information I needed, and from there, I would unleash the storm that would bring him crashing down. The atmosphere at the book signing was electric, a buzz of excitement that filled the room as fans clamored for a moment with Mark Ellis. As I approached him, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I had rehearsed my lines, prepared for every possible interaction, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into dangerous territory. "Mark," I called out as I reached the front of the line, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my face. "I absolutely loved your last book. What inspired you to write this new one?" He looked up, his blue eyes sparkling with charm. "Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. This new one is a bit of a departure for me, more personal, more emotional. I wanted to explore themes of love and loss in a way that feels authentic." His voice dripped with sincerity, and I felt a flicker of anger rise within me. How could he sound so genuine while he was stealing my wife's love? I nodded, pretending to hang on his every word, but inside I was calculating my next move. "That sounds amazing. I'm sure it will resonate with a lot of people," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But I've heard some rumors about your past relationships. How do you feel they impact your writing?" The question hung in the air, and I watched as Mark's smile faltered for just a moment. "Every writer has their demons," he replied, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of discomfort. "I think it's important to channel those experiences into the work." I felt a rush of satisfaction at having struck a nerve, but I couldn't let up. "I guess that makes sense, but some critics say your work lacks depth. They argue that your characters are one-dimensional. How do you respond to that?" His demeanor shifted, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. "I think every reader interprets literature differently. Some may find my style more accessible, while others may prefer more complex narratives. It's a matter of taste, really." I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the realization that I was not just another adoring fan. I pressed on, feeling emboldened. "Well, I think readers are starting to crave authenticity. Perhaps that's where you could improve." He chuckled, but it was strained. "I appreciate your feedback. I'm always looking to evolve as a writer." I could sense my chance slipping away, and I knew I had to act quickly. "I'm actually part of a small literary group online. We've been discussing your work quite a bit lately, and there's a lot of interest in your next book. We're planning to host a discussion about it. Would you be open to an interview? It could be a great opportunity for you to connect with your readers on a deeper level." His eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion creeping in. "An interview for what platform?" I hesitated, a wave of panic washing over me. I quickly fabricated a name for my imaginary group, something that sounded credible yet vague enough to avoid scrutiny. "It's called The Literary Lens. We focus on in-depth discussions of contemporary authors and their works. I think it could be a great way to showcase your insights." Mark seemed to mull it over, and I seized the moment. It would be a chance to reshape some of the narratives out there, to show the real you behind the books. Finally, he nodded, a hint of interest in his eyes. "Sure, I'd be open to that. Just send me the details and we can set something up." As I walked away from the signing, I felt a rush of triumph. I had made contact, and now I had a way to gather more information about him. I could use this opportunity to dig deeper, to find out more about his writing process, his inspirations, and his vulnerabilities. It was the perfect setup for my plan to undermine him. Over the next few weeks, I continued to build my network within the literary community. I engaged with the small group of writers I had connected with online, sharing my experiences and encouraging them to join in my efforts to discredit Mark. We crafted a series of coordinated posts, highlighting alleged inconsistencies in his work and calling out his supposed lack of depth. The more we fed the narrative, the more traction it gained. I launched a campaign of sorts, using social media to amplify our voices. I created fake accounts that appeared to be genuine fans, posting reviews that echoed our sentiments. Mark's latest work is a disappointment. It feels recycled, lacking the originality we've come to expect from him. The comments began to pile up, and I reveled in the chaos I was creating. But as I watched the backlash grow, I felt a creeping sense of unease. Was I really willing to destroy a man's career? The guilt gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I was doing this for myself, for my dignity, and for the love that Claire had betrayed. I had to remind myself that this was about reclaiming my power. The day of my scheduled interview with Mark arrived, and I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. I arrived at the cafe where we agreed to meet, my heart racing as I prepared to confront him under the guise of a supportive fan. I had my questions ready, crafted to elicit responses that would expose his weaknesses and draw out any insecurities he had. When he walked in, I plastered on a smile, acting like the eager admirer I had pretended to be. We chatted about his previous works, and I feigned interest in his writing process. But beneath my facade, I was a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mark, I've seen some discussions online about your work, and some fans have expressed concerns about how your personal life affects your writing. How do you respond to that? I asked, watching his expression carefully. He seemed taken aback, his confidence wavering for a moment. I think every writer is influenced by their experiences. But I strive to keep my personal life separate from my work. It's a delicate balance. I pressed further, leaning in with feigned sincerity. But isn't it true that some of your readers feel you've lost touch with the authenticity that made your earlier work so compelling? His discomfort was palpable, and I could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed persona. I felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that I was chipping away at his confidence. As the interview continued, I pushed harder, weaving in more pointed questions that probed at his vulnerabilities. I watched as his facade began to crumble, and with each answer I felt a sense of vindication. I was taking back control, dismantling the man who had invaded my life and stolen my wife's affection. When the interview concluded, I left the cafe with a sense of triumph. I had gathered the information I needed, and I was ready to unleash my final blow. I would write an exposé that would turn the tide against him, a narrative that would expose the truth behind the facade. But as I sat down to write, I hesitated. I could feel the weight of my actions pressing down on me. Was this really who I wanted to be? I had set out for revenge, but in the process I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and as I stared at the blank page before me, I realized that my quest for revenge was leading me down a dark path. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself in the process, but I had come too far to turn back now. I couldn't let Mark win. As I sat in front of my computer, staring at the blinking cursor on the blank page, I felt a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. The plan I had meticulously crafted was now unfolding, and yet the satisfaction I had anticipated was replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. I had spent weeks plotting Mark's downfall, and with every word I typed, I felt the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. I had successfully gathered the information I needed, the insights from our interview revealing cracks in Mark's carefully constructed image. I could paint him as a man whose charm masked a deeper insecurity, whose success was built on a shaky foundation. The words flowed easily, the narrative forming in my mind, but with each keystroke I also felt an echo of doubt. Was I really willing to destroy a man's career, to ruin his life, just for the sake of my own pride? I thought about Claire, about the love I had for her that had turned bitter in the wake of her betrayal. I had been consumed by a desire for revenge, convinced that tearing Mark down would somehow restore my dignity and win her back. But now I was faced with the harsh truth. Revenge was a double-edged sword. It could cut deep, but it also had the power to slice through my own integrity. As I reflected on the path I had chosen, I realized that my motivations had shifted. What had begun as a quest to reclaim my power had morphed into something darker. I was no longer just a man seeking justice. I was becoming a man fueled by resentment and rage. I had lost sight of who I was in the process, and the man I was becoming was not someone I recognized or respected. With every word I typed, I felt a part of my humanity slipping away. I thought about the writers I had connected with online, those who had rallied around me in my quest for revenge. They had encouraged me, fed my anger, and together we had created a narrative against Mark that threatened to spiral out of control. But now, I wondered if I was doing more harm than good. Was this truly a fight worth fighting? In a moment of clarity, I realized that I didn't want to be the villain in this story. I didn't want to be the one who tore another person down to lift myself up. I had been hurt, yes, but I did not have to become a monster in response. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my choices heavy on my shoulders, and I made a decision. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall, my heart racing. I would not go through with my plan. I would not publish the exposé that could ruin Mark's life. Instead, I would confront Claire, not with anger or accusations, but with honesty. I would share my feelings, my pain and my fears. I would reclaim my dignity by choosing to rise above the petty revenge that had consumed me. The thought of facing her filled me with dread, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I had lost myself in the pursuit of vengeance, and now it was time to find my way back. I wanted to show Claire that I was better than the man I had become, that I could forgive her betrayal and move forward, even if it meant letting her go. With newfound resolve, I dialed her number, my heart racing as I waited for her to pick up. When she answered, I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Hey, is everything okay?" "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil within me. "We need to talk." I arranged to meet her at a park near our home, a place where we had shared so many happy moments. As I walked there, I felt the weight of my decision settle over me like a protective cloak. I was no longer driven by revenge. I was ready to face my emotions head-on. When I saw her sitting on a bench, her expression a mix of apprehension and hope, my heart ached. I had loved this woman fiercely, and despite the pain she had caused me, I could still see the person I had fallen for. I approached her slowly, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. "Claire," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, about us." She looked down, a hint of guilt etched on her face. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I replied, my heart heavy. "I've realized that I've been consumed by anger and revenge. I thought that tearing Mark down would somehow make me feel better, but it wouldn't. It would only make me lose myself even more." Her eyes widened in surprise, and I could see the flicker of hope in her gaze. "You're not going to do anything, are you?" "No," I said firmly. "I want to move forward, but I need to be honest with you. I need to know if you still want this, if you still want us." Claire looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I do. I made a terrible mistake, and I regret it every day. I want to be with you, but I understand if you can't forgive me." In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions: hurt, love, and the possibility of healing. "I can forgive you, but it's going to take time. We need to rebuild what we had, and that starts with honesty." As we talked, I felt the weight of my anger begin to lift. I was no longer the man driven by revenge. I was reclaiming my identity, my worth, and my love for Claire. It wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to try. In the days that followed, I found solace in writing again, not as a means of revenge, but as a way to express my healing journey. I poured my heart into stories that reflected my struggles and triumphs, rediscovering my passion for storytelling. As for Mark, I would let him fade into the background of my life. He was no longer my enemy. He was simply a man who had crossed my path in a moment of weakness. I would not allow him to dictate my happiness or my worth. In the end, I realized that revenge was a hollow victory, one that would only lead to more pain. Instead, I chose forgiveness and the possibility of renewal. And as I looked forward to rebuilding my life with Claire, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace that came from reclaiming my power, not through destruction but through love. I had fought my battle and emerged not as a victor, but as someone who chose to rise above the darkness. And in that choice, I found my true strength. The journey ahead would be uncertain, but I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time.